Sorry, I stole your seat because I ended up taking it.
All right, today's topic is the review for the midterm exam, which is next time. A few basics. It is a multiple choice exam, so you will just need a sharp mind and a sharp pencil. We will give you the exam and the Scantron sheet to fill out. If luck holds out, by the end of the afternoon, you will know what your score is. I want to take time at the beginning before we begin to review individual figures pictured there to talk about any questions you have about the general format of the exam. The practice exam is online, so are the answers, so are the art questions and so on. So I hope you can look at that and have a pretty clear idea of what the exam is going to look like. Yes?
Did you just put the answers to the practice exam up? Because I tried to look at them yesterday and couldn't open.
Yeah, I had the ambition of doing it yesterday,
Okay.
but I did it in fact by like 9 o'clock this morning.
That's fine.
I still can't access it.
They're not up?
No.
Yeah, it's good.
Oh.
Sometimes they save it, so
Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, rat. I don't know if you can do this, but it's supposed to say practice midterm answers.pdf, and I bet I didn't change the name of the file, so it says practice midterm answers 2012.pdf. If you can insert a 2012, see if that works. I'll fix that as soon as I get back to the office. But yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, yeah, if you do that.
/303/practice with
Yeah,
answers
yeah.
2012. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Add the 2012 and it will work. I apologize. I forgot that there was that little. Any other questions about the form of the exam? Yeah. Yes. If you go to bonavac.info/303, then to practice midterm answers 2012.pdf, you should be able to get the answers.
That works.
In general, I will be concerned with, for example, futurism and surrealism and other artistic movements, not individual names. So I'm not going to be asking you, you won't have to worry about the details of who is whom among all of those people. As long as you know that so-and-so, in fact, what I'll often say is something like so-and-so, writes in the Futurist Manifesto or the Surrealist Manifesto or something, blah, 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 meaning that, and you won't have to identify the quote, you'll be given and asked to, in effect, identify the explanation for it or something like that. But I'll give you the person's name, I'll give you the movement, so you don't have to know, oh, Sarah is a surrealist and Marinetti is a futurist and so on. Other questions? Like that.
So you just have to be able to interpret the quotes, basically?
For those people, yeah. I might give you a quote and you're asked to interpret it. I won't actually ask you to identify a quote from any of those people or anything like that. And really that's just a way of asking you about their views. And the quote is actually a bit of a softball. I mean, it's sort of like, in volleyball where the person sets you up. There I am. Sarah says this about surrealism. And then you're supposed to say, meaning, boom! Okay, so I'm trying to help you by putting in those quotations, not trick you or something. Yeah?
Are for the artists and such, are the futurism and stuff, are those on the website of which ones we're actually going over?
Yeah, those are actually there. You can look at the bottom of the practice exam to see which ones are included, because I there give you, and they'll be in sets, just like the ones I've got there, where, okay, you'll have to identify things from this collection of 5 movements, then from this collection of 5.
But it is the ones on the practice
It's
test?
exactly the ones on the practice test, yeah.
Thank you.
And I think I've got the practice test set up so that each movement gets one and only one question. That won't necessarily be true of the actual exam. There might be some that get nothing. There might be some that get more than one. In general, I tried to find things for everyone, but sometimes I couldn't find anything I was happy with, so used 2 of something else. Any other questions about that? Yeah?
Photography?
The photography, well, only insofar as it relates to those movements. So, for example, photosecession is a specifically photographic artistic movement, but some others, like surrealism, that could be Dali paintings with the bent clocks, it could be photographs of people, it could be all sorts of things. So some of those movements can transcend photography as well, and painting and sculpture and other things. Futurism is like that, surrealism is like that, Dada, Bauhaus, Bauhaus is normally identified as an architecture movement, but actually there are photographs and paintings and so on that go along with it as well. Yeah.
And we don't need to worry too much about paintings that blur the lines between the movements but are classified in one movement, you know, just...
Right. I had to leave out some of my favorite images just because they're sort of impressionist and sort of post-impressionist, or they're sort of naturalist but sort of impressionist. They're on the boundaries, which is what makes them so important in the history of art, because that's the boundary. That's sort of a naturalistic, realistic painting, but using certain techniques of the impressionists that inspire the impressionists. And I had to leave that out because it's sort of realistic and sort of impressionist, and some of the most important things, unfortunately, are on the cusp of movements like that. And so since they weren't really clear-cut examples of one thing as opposed to another, yeah, I omitted those. So it should be really clear-cut examples. Other questions about art or the form of the exam? Okay, well, I thought what we'd do today primarily is look at the people who are actually going to be on the quotation part, because they're basically guaranteed to have 3 questions on the exam about them, maybe more. And so that's really where you should spend a significant amount of your time. There will be quotations to identify, and then typically there will be at least one other question as well about their thought, asking you to generalize. So if you know these people well, then you will know a lot. You will be able to do well on most of the exam. By the way, who are those people? Can you identify them by photographs? Hume.
Karl Marx.
Right. Nietzsche.
T.S. Eliot.
T.S. Eliot, yes.
Yeats.
Yates, good.
Kipling. Shaw.
Shaw.
I don't know that one.
Forster.
Pirandello.
Come back.
Eddie.
Yeah, Pirandello.
Fitzgerald.
Wilson.
Lenin, Freud.
Freud. Very good. Okay. So you did well in the first part. Now, David Hume. Since I've got 3 or 4 questions I can ask about these people, really, I think the main thing, the most important thing for you to do is identify the 3 or 4 most important thoughts from each of these people, right? What am I going to be choosing quotations to express? What am I going to be asking questions about? So, David Hume, tell me what is memorable about David Hume.
He talks about reason.
Okay, good. There is the is and ought problem, and then there's the question of reason, right? What about reason?
How does reason affect morals?
Good, reason and morality, right? His basic view is reason doesn't, motivate us. Yeah. Ooh, how do I make it do that? I don't know.
You just press the space bar, it'll fill in the words.
Oh, okay, cool. Morality does. Yeah. Oh, this is wonderful. So, morality. Yes, thank you. This is awesome. I'm not very good at typing on the iPad, but it's very tolerant of my mistakes. Okay, so the idea is, reason doesn't motivate us. But on the other hand, morality does motivate us. The whole point of talking about ought or ought not, must not, is to tell us what to do, right? So he thinks that morality is essentially something that motivates us, that affects our actions and our affections, our feelings and so on, or at least it's meant to. But reason can't do that. You're engaged in a bit of reasoning. You're thinking, what is 3 plus 5? 1, 2, 3. 1, 8. Okay, you engage in that bit of reasoning, and so does that motivate you to do anything? 3 plus 5 is 8, so that doesn't motivate you, right? It's like, it's a fact, but it by itself doesn't motivate. And so his idea is that therefore the conclusions of morality are not conclusions of reason. Instead, morality stems from what?
Perception.
Emotions.
It's, okay, good. It's perception, it's emotion, passion, okay, feelings of approval and disapproval. When I think that something is wrong, I think about a willful murder, for example, and I ask whether it's wrong, and I say yes, but what do I mean by it? I just mean that there's a feeling inside my breast of disapproval. I think, no, that is wrong, and inside me, all right, it's the feeling inside me that it's all about. Okay, well, yeah, there's my David Hume impression. Now, anything else about Hume? Good, now if you know these things, you don't have to memorize quotations. You don't actually have to go through and worry about the details of the various arguments and so on. If you understand these points and you understand them well, you'll be able to identify quotations. And if I ask you further questions about Hume, you'll be able to use your knowledge to figure out what Hume would say about this, or how Hume's thought compares to someone else's thought, and so on. So in short, this is what you should really understand thoroughly and associate with Hume. What will kill you on the exam is, oh yeah, I remember somebody said that, but I don't remember who. Okay, if you're in that position, you'll be in trouble. Because if it's like, oh yeah, oh this business about a willingness to use violence, was that Hume? No, okay? So make sure you're straight on who is who. Karl Marx. 3 or 4 key things to know about Karl Marx.
Marxism.
Marxism, yeah, well, you probably figured that out from the day. What else?
Alienation.
Alienation, good. Right, communism,
Social classes.
good.
Oh, like the proletariat.
Yeah, class struggle, and specifically the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. You have to be able to spell them. No, you just have to know A, B, C, D, or E. You've got to be able to spell the first 5 letters of the alphabet. That's a joke, yes.
Consciousness derived from material circumstances.
Good, yes. This business about consciousness and life, right? That looks like couscous. Wait a minute. Consciousness, yes, yes.
Got it.
Oh, no. All right, yes, but consciousness and life, in short, the material basis for things.
The two-level theory with how we're usually, like, he's like a neo-Gnostic and believing that.
Yes, that's right. He is a neo-Gnostic in my terms. Where is that thing? Yes. That's right. So it's really a version of a two-level theory. Exactly. He thinks that because there is this level of material and economic forces, and then a superstructure of intellectual matters of ideas, what he's describing as consciousness, that then if you understand how things work at the base level, you can understand and manipulate how they work at a higher level. And so, indeed, it leads him to that sort of two-level idea about society as well as about the nature of humanity. Anything else about Marx?
We're different from animals because of what we make.
Good. Yes, this idea of human essence. We make, we produce. Okay, and so production is something that is essential to us. Oh, good grief. Okay, anything else about Marx? Yeah?
Wasn't he against religion, and so like religion is the opiate of the masses?
Yes, religion is the opiate of the masses, so he's hostile to religion. He's really hostile to philosophy and to all theory as this mere superstructure. And a clever person might say, well, what about your own theories, Professor Marx? But, I mean, his answer would be, I think, well, yeah, yeah, what do you say? Yeah, that's a good question. Why are you bothering to write these things if, in fact, all of this is mere superstructure and has nothing to do with causation? What's the point of calling people to revolution and saying, working men of the world unite, if ideas have no impact?
I thought he'd said that in the beginning, because I'd read in the beginning of the reading that we had for him, and he was saying how this is founded, and you see, you can see this in the world. This isn't.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. I mean, it seems to me what he should have said is, well, look, my whole point is I too am determined by these forces and so on, so I can do nothing else. In fact, what he says is, well, actually, my philosophy is different from those other philosophies because mine is grounded in practice and is really stemming from life and not from mere abstract thought. So he thinks somehow he's exempt from this, and that certain other kinds of theory can be. His is really bottom-up, bubbling up from life rather than imposed top-down, he thinks. And so, yeah, you're right. His own view is, and this is something actually really important for this. He's concerned with the ultimate criterion of truth being practical. So a practical theory. Remember his quotation, philosophers have only interpreted the world. The point is to change it. And so it's practical both in the sense that it's arising from life and real human practice and real human relationships, but also it is having as its objective changing the world, not simply interpreting it. So in that way, he thinks the theory he's producing is quite different from most things that are at that high level. Yeah?
I was going to say, he believes the proletariat themselves should be the ones who cause the revolution, as opposed to Lenin, who thinks that it should come from the class.
Good. He thinks that, yes, the proletarians should be responsible for the revolution, whereas Lenin doubts that. In fact, I'm going to skip my plan here and jump to Lenin, because it might be that it's useful to think about them in tandem and to contemplate how they're different. What will distinguish Lenin from Marx?
Revolutionary elite.
Good. His emphasis on the revolutionary elite. He says, on the one hand, there is no difference between me and Marx, but actually there is really on this question. He thinks the proletariat will not, in fact, revolt all by themselves. He looks, roughly 50 years after Marx was writing and saying, well, so far we haven't seen this revolution. And in fact, all the historical trends that I notice seem to me to point to the fact that there isn't going to be one. So, he says, it has to be brought about in another way. It's not going to happen spontaneously. Instead, we need a revolutionary elite that's going to bring it about. What else makes Lenin distinctive?
And tying into that Marx was a determinist and Lenin believed in the power of human free will.
Good.
Which was the reason why he thought that this revolutionary elite could exist and could influence the progress of the revolution.
Exactly. He believes in the power of free will. Marx says there is this material substrate and everything is the result of forces that arise out of that. Lenin's saying, well, don't minimize the fact that a particular person, a group of people, can have a huge historical impact. And so he's concerned to say it's wrong to take that as a thesis of determinism. In fact, as if these forces are just playing out according to something like physical laws. That's not true. Human beings can have an effect on this, and in fact need to, he thinks, in order to remove the injustice that Marx was pointing out. So his argument is yes, in fact, this is not determined. Human action of the revolutionary elite, for example, can determine how things turn out. Yes?
Is the revolutionary elite the same thing as a strong organization of leaders that lead the revolution?
Yes.
That's the same thing.
Yes, so in fact, this is going to have to be, organized. What else is going to be have to be true of this revolutionary elite?
Small.
Centralized.
Good, small, centralized. What else?
Professional revolutionary?
Professional, right.
Aren't they militaristic or whatever?
Well, in other words, this isn't something for amateurs. These people have to be dedicated full time. Don't think that you can work in your day job as a professor or a plumber or whatever it is, and, occasionally go to a meeting and say, yeah, we need change, and that this is your revolutionary activity. It requires people who are going to dedicate themselves full time to doing this. What else has to be the case of this elite? Yeah.
No opposition in the party.
No opposition. Yes, it must be unified, and that means there must be no opposition within it. What happens if there is opposition? You get rid of them. Exactly. They must be eliminated. What else about the elite?
Violence.
Good. I think maybe that deserves its own separate category. Yes, violence as a means to the revolution. Marx implies at some points, look, the bourgeoisie is not going to give up what it has peacefully. And so he realizes that his call to revolution is at some points probably going to have to become violent. On the other hand, Marx isn't himself urging violence. He thinks much of it can be accomplished peacefully in various ways. Lenin has no such illusions. Lenin just says, look, this is a violent movement. He advocates violence to bring it about, but then violence to maintain the purity of the revolutionary elite. Violence once the elite is established, right? He argues in favor of this idea of collective guilt. And so you don't have to individually be guilty of anything, as long as you're of the wrong social class or have the wrong stance on the revolution. Okay? And so violence is not only the way of making it happen, but once it's happened, it's the way of maintaining order after that. Anything else about Lenin? Yeah.
Well, is his theory active while Marx's is largely passive? Like Marx says
Active
this is going to happen, and then Lenin says you have to make this happen?
Defensive versus offense.
All right, that's interesting. Active versus passive, offense versus defense. Yeah, in some ways those are good metaphors, I think, to have. Because Marx is describing a condition of society. He's talking about history being a history of class struggle. He's talking about a possible solution to the problem of class struggle. He thinks it will come about through the action of the classes. He isn't really calling on any particular person to do any particular thing. Notice he says workers of the world unite. He's talking about something like a large international sort of labor movement. He's not really directly calling a small group to violence. He's calling a large group to become aware of their rights and aware of their role and so on. And so in that way, it's not exactly passive, but it isn't, it's very vague in terms of the activity it actually calls for. Whereas Lenin is very much aggressive, so very much on offense as opposed to defense, talking about the role of individuals as opposed to broad groups. And so, yeah, this offense versus defense action versus a sort of passive or very generalized action, that seems to me an appropriate metaphor for helping you to distinguish them and to identify quotes. Anything else? Okay, well, let's zoom back then to Nietzsche. What are those 3 or 4 key ideas from Nietzsche?
He talks about like the chemistry of. I just remember the word. Like
Good. Yeah, he talks about the chemistry that lies behind everything. Now, what does he mean by that?
He says like impulses, or like what we do can be like broken down into like impulses. It's weird. Like he talks about like feelings in relation to like sound and like taste and weird stuff, chemistry.
Okay, good.
I remember the quote itself because like the wording of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And, like,
what if everything, truth, beauty, justice, blah, 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 all of that reduces to these low things is ultimately the result of the chemistry of our sensations and so on. What he's really saying is, why am I doing what I'm doing now? Why am I standing in front of you doing this? And a common sense answer would be, well, we're reviewing for the midterm exam, which is coming up on Friday, because you're nervous about it, and I want you to be sure of you understand exactly what I'm going to expect you to know, and so on and so forth. Nietzsche says, why am I in fact doing this? It's all a matter of biochemistry. It's my internal composition. It's the physical laws that govern it. What if all of our actions really end up reducing just to biochemistry in the end? Okay, so it's an extreme version of a 2-level theory. Yeah.
There's no fixed system which you can use to derive like how humans are going to react to different things.
Good. There is no fixed system. There are no eternal truths or absolute truths. Right? So one way of putting this is that he is a historical relativist. Whoa. Thank you. Everything is relative to a given historical period. So he's hostile to the general aims of philosophy, which have been to say what is universally true, true for all people at all times, or true of the world in general. He says, no. Talk at most about what is true now, of human beings now, or of what the world is becoming. Yeah.
Truths are small, little things, and they're found by the scientific method, and even those are ultimately relative, but anything that purports to be like a grand scheme which describes things is really false.
Okay, that's a nice image too. Truth is small, right? It's discovered in small ways.
Exciting.
It can be true that we're having this conversation right now, but global truths, universal truths about the world, be suspicious of those. So, yeah. Actually, I don't, there we go. Yeah, truth, and I'll put it in scare quotes, is small. Yeah, that's maybe a nice image. Yes?
Change comes from irrationality.
Yes, this idea of irrationality. What drives history is not some grand march toward progress, as Hegel thought. No, it's some sort of collection of irrational things that result from human interactions. Okay? And so it doesn't actually make much sense at all. Yes?
Eventually, mankind will be able to overcome the idea of good and evil to become the Übermensch.
Ah, yes, we can overcome good and evil, eventually to become what he refers to as the Übermensch, the Overman, the Superman, inspired the comic strips and the movies and so on. I mean, rather indirectly, but nevertheless. So yes, he has a work that is entitled Beyond Good and Evil, so he wants to go beyond ordinary moral categories. And eventually, you're right, it's a sort of evolutionary account. He thinks this ultimately leads us to a conception of what humanity could be but is not yet. We should be thinking in terms of what we should evolve toward, what we could evolve toward. Yeah.
Doesn't that inspire the futurists later?
It does inspire the futurists. It inspires all sorts of people for good and for bad purposes, among them the Nazis. But it can be taken in all sorts of ways, depending upon what you think this evolution is like, where you think it's going, what would promote it, etc. Yeah?
Does he mean like, not really anti-progress, but he takes progress with a grain of salt?
Yeah, that's really part of the irrationality idea. Irrationality. No reason of, faith in progress. Thank you. Yeah, that's something that is key, because really you have to understand that throughout the 19th century, there was a sort of faith in human progress. The 19th century itself seemed to exemplify vast progress as material life got better and better for more and more people as a result of the advances that resulted from the agricultural revolution, the scientific revolution, the industrial revolution. And so by the end of the 19th century, there was broad throughout the land, if I can speak that way, a faith in human progress. Things were getting better and better. And Nietzsche says, look, don't take that for granted. That is not some fundamental universal truth of history. That is something that may or may not be true now, but it's luck. It's really history is driven by these irrational forces. Yeah?
He says that God is dead and he's a nihilist.
Ah, good. God is dead. Wait. Yeah, God is dead. And who killed him?
We did.
We did. Yeah, we did. Ah, we did. We did him. Okay, yes. And is he a nihilist? That's more controversial, because at times he seems to talk that way. At other times he seems to say, actually, I recommend a physiology of value. What will promote health? And seems to think health ought to substitute for traditional morality. I don't think he understood which ways that would cut. I mean, what really is a healthy lifestyle? Who are the healthiest people in the United States by group?
Europe.
No, in the United States. Don't say Europe. Europe is not in the United States. Mormons are, actually. So, I mean, if you really take that health idea seriously, then we all ought to become Mormons. But I don't think that's... I mean, so I don't know whether he would really ultimately take that seriously, but at certain points, that's what he says. Yeah?
He said what drives people's action is the will to power.
The will to power, yes. So truth is small. What really drives us is not reason, but the will to power.
That seems very similar to Lenin.
It is in some ways similar to Lenin. In fact, one way of looking at Lenin is to say he's, in some sense, Marx plus Nietzsche. And later I will say actually exactly that about Mussolini. Mussolini was a philosopher, really. He wrote quite a bit about philosophy, and it's really a combination of Marx and Nietzsche very directly. And so, yeah, there is this element of the will to power, of human action taken in a historical context, in the absence of absolute truths, that is shared by at least Mussolini among the fascists. And in that respect, there are ideas here that have important ramifications later. Now, some people will say, I remember my mother when she saw me carrying around a book of Nietzsche's. I was in high school. And she was appalled because she said, he is the philosopher of Nazism. Okay? And in some ways, that's really unfair to Nietzsche. Because he's not himself a Nazi. But on the other hand, the Nazis seize upon his works and take them in a certain direction. So you can see an element there that inspires Lenin, that inspires Mussolini, that inspires various bad people as well as some good people later on. Yes?
He has like a theory of how theories are developed.
Yeah, he does have a sort of theory of how theories are developed, and how is that? I mean, what develops them?
Doesn't he like he makes a thesis and a claim, and then he makes an antithesis or something like that?
Okay. Hegel was the one who said, look, I'm a relativist about the world itself and our theories of the world. But Hegel said, nevertheless, there is a systematic and rational way in which theories develop. People put forward a hypothesis. And then it doesn't quite match the evidence precisely, so someone formulates an opposite hypothesis, which he refers to as the antithesis. And then that doesn't quite match the facts either, so these fight it out for a while, and then people try to synthesize them and propose a new hypothesis, which can be considered a synthesis of the other two. It in some sense transcends them. And then the process begins again. The synthesis of that old dispute becomes the thesis, and then antithesis, and so on. And that's why Hegel had a faith in progress, because he says every time we do that, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, we're rising up a level and accounting for more and our theories get better and better. Nietzsche says, well, that would be great if in fact what led to the antithesis and then led to the synthesis and so on. I feel like a mime here. If all of that was really rational. But he says it's not rational. Quite often theories get replaced for completely irrational reasons. It's not that people have devastating arguments against a view. I mean, why might they abandon a view without having devastating arguments against it? Maybe they're students who get tired of their professors and think, this view is boring, I want something interesting. Or maybe they say, you know what, I can't publish this. I mean, it's just more of this. To publish something, I have to have some new idea. So I'm going to come up with something new. Or maybe they say, well, wait a minute, I just hate those people. I mean, I can't tell you what's wrong with their view, but they suck. I hate them, okay? And a surprising amount gets done by that. I mean, people will say, yeah, so-and-so has this view, but look at him. He was kind of a schmuck. I don't like him. And so, I mean, I'm making that ridiculously personal, but in fact, a lot of things in the history of science and in the history of philosophy kind of go like that. People read a view, and do they have an argument against it? Maybe not, but there's something fundamental they don't like about it. They say, no, it can't be this way. Maybe they dislike the person who was behind it, but maybe they just don't like the view in some respects. They think, I don't think the world can be like that. It just feels wrong to me. And so what might make it feel wrong is some rational flaw in it, but it might be all sorts of other irrational considerations. And so Nietzsche's saying, look, what drives this sort of theory change is some weird mixture of the rational and the irrational. You can't have faith that it's really a rational process. Yeah?
Resentment?
You're getting away from the things we actually read. But resentment, yeah, at a certain point, he does think resentment drives a lot. So what, in fact, leads to us to transform one theory into another, often it's resentment. It's like, yeah, those guys think they have it all figured out. They're the ones who have the chairs at Harvard or his thing. They're the ones who have the chairs at Tübingen. I don't. I'm teaching at Basel. That's pretty disappointing, I don't like those guys at all. Those fellows at Oxford, they're really the worst of all. Well, now I've turned him into a Britishman. I'm sorry, an Englishman. I'm sorry, but you get the idea of, resentment of people can often be what drives this. So, yes, when I said irrationality, he has a variety of views about what specifically drives those changes. The will to power, resentment. There are a number of other mechanisms he thinks that psychologically lead to this kind of thing. Okay, well, let's move on to T.S. Eliot. Eliot is, well, a hard person to choose quotations from, let me tell you, having just tried to do it over the last 2 days. But what are some ideas that we want to be aware of in Eliot?
The wasteland.
Yeah, the wasteland.
Like everything's like sad and stuff after World War I, basically. World War I ruins everything.
Okay, good. Sad and stuff after World War I. Again, that's a pretty good image to have in your mind. What is he worried about more specifically?
Collapse of civilization.
Yeah, the collapse, the decline, right? So, decline and even collapse of civilization as a result of the war. I keep putting in these M's where there should be spaces. And it turns out they're really hard to get rid of.
We know what you mean.
I'll clean it up later. Okay, what else?
Loss of faith.
Okay, good, a loss of faith. And by the way, along with this sadness you're describing, there's a huge amount of imagery in Eliot of what? I mean, just think about the very first line. April is the cruelest month. Why? Yeah, exactly. This idea of death, rebirth, barrenness. The coming under this red rock out in the desert, right? No rain, and then the end, what the thunder said. Finally, at the end of the poem, it rains. So all this dry, wet, dead, new life, and so on is an important theme throughout. Yes?
I have a question. When you said that Nietzsche also talks about when he reevaluates the value when we study like the God's dead, he also talks about the loss of faith too. So how
Yes.
you can like distinguish between them since they also think.
Well, the cynical answer is I put them under different sections, so they won't be choices for the same quotes. Nietzsche will be in section 1, which emphasizes philosophers, and Eliot in a later section that doesn't have Nietzsche in it. So that's part of the answer. But more specifically, Nietzsche is worried, it's not, I mean, what is Eliot's observer in the wasteland doing? Essentially observing, right? Whereas Nietzsche's talking about now we're tossed out to sea and we don't have a compass. In fact, which direction is up? Which is down? Which is east? How do we steer? How do we know what to do, right? He has this sense that it's not just, oh, gee, you know, look, things are kind of falling apart. Bummer. Look, it's all barren. Nothing's alive. What's going on? It's more like, holy Moses, now I'm on a raft out in the sea. I have no way to steer. I have nothing to navigate by. I don't know what's going on. And there's this feeling of real terror as a result of that loss of direction. So for him, it's, to use that active and passive thing again, Nietzsche's concern is very active. What do I do now? I've lost absolutes. I don't believe in God anymore. I don't believe in any absolute truth of any kind. But now I have no norms left. I have nothing to steer by. I'm in deep trouble. Whereas in Eliot, it's much more this sense of the passive observer who's looking at the decline and isn't sort of seized by, oh, now what do I do? It's more like a, you know, I'm sitting there by the dull canal. And it's not a practical question in the same way. Yeah?
Isn't he also the one Eliot's the one that was on the balcony and said, at least we have each other?
Oh, no, that's Matthew Arnold.
Oh, okay.
So Arnold is one of the people who didn't get a star. There could be a question about him, but there won't be a quote. But yeah, the love, let us be true to one another, that was Matthew Arnold. And later, in effect, that's E.M. Forster, too, who says, you know, we have at least personal relationships and an appreciation of beauty. But here, we don't even have that, really. Although, in a certain sense, there's a little bit like that, because in the end, what does the thunder say? Da, da, da. It sounds like Dada, but in fact, I wonder whether it's partly what inspires Dada. But those are Sanskrit terms, right? For mercy, self-control, forgiveness, for concern for others. So what do we have in this dry wasteland? Well, at least we have concern for each other. At least we can worry about that. And so there are some virtues that can still maybe emerge and give us a basis for rebirth. So the end of the poem is a little bit optimistic. The rain actually comes, and he finds some ground on which to start rebuilding. But he goes all the way back to the beginnings of civilization in the Upanishads and says that's where we have to begin. We really have to go back to basics. And so there's a little bit of optimism there, but it's sort of really, you know,
Civilization wants to die.
Civilization wants to die, like the Sibyl, and we have to go way back to the beginnings to find the core of how to rebuild it. Now, there's one other theme that I think is important, well actually several others, but one that's really important. All the languages, all the allusions, what's that all about?
He's like tracking different civilizations, I guess, and putting it into one poem, because the poem itself is about like how civilization is like ready to, like he said, ready to be over. So he's like just showing like, you know, like different parts of history and just grabbing them and putting them in his poem.
That's right. He's grabbing all these things from history, from literature, putting them in the poem. He's grabbing these fragments, these elements of civilization. Yeah, so he's really finding fragments of civilization, things to preserve. He's sort of there in this wasteland, but at least there are some fragments. And so what does he do? He starts picking them up, right? Sort of like you go to some of these New Mexico old villages where the Indians lived hundreds of years ago, and you find fragments of pottery or whatever. You are not allowed to pick them up. But Eliot is metaphorically picking them up and, you know, seeing what he can rebuild from. Anything else? There are a number of images that it might be worth noting. I don't know if it's worth writing them down, but the tarot cards, the Fisher King, what else? Tiresias, Phlebas. There are a number of characters like that in the poem, and they could pop up in one of these quotations.
Doesn't he use like rats in his poem as imagery?
Yeah, rats as imagery. Yeah, they're rats, they're bones.
Pearls.
Pearls, right? Those are pearls that were his eyes. Yeah.
Water is used as both like a representation of like life and death. Like it's not just used in a singular form. So like if you reference water, how would you want us to, like symbolically it's used for both. So
that's a good point. Fear death by drowning. So water is in a sense a sign of life, as with the rain at the end, but also as there, a sign of death. If I were to ask you a question, T.S. Eliot in The Wasteland uses water as a symbol of That would be a really, really hard question. And it would probably have to have more than one answer. After all, it's the canal in which the Fisher King is fishing. It represents the possibility of life at the end, but it's also the death by drowning. And the guys who are there, and those are pearls that were his eyes, and so on. Phlebas the sailor is there. So, yeah, I wouldn't know how to actually write that question because of that. It would make a great essay. If there were an essay question in the exam, that would be a wonderful one. Tell me about the water imagery and tell me what it means throughout the poem. Because it has different meanings and it keeps shifting. But that's one of the things that a multiple choice exam is not good for bringing out. Okay, let's move on to Yeats. Okay, good. Civilization, yeah, that's it, is weary. Yeah. Good. And falling. Now, in that respect, he sounds, wait, it didn't spell it right. What? Who? Sell your Apple stock, everybody.
If you just click on it.
Oh, man. Yes, there. Absolutely, wonderful. Okay. Yeah, it's weary and falling. What else? Yeah.
He talks about how, like, as one civilization falls, another one's been, like, building up.
Yes, there's this theory of the cycles of history, right? This gyre imagery. And so, yes, something will replace the current civilization. But what? Right? So it's not that there's going to be a vacuum. We're not really going to be stuck in this wasteland where there's nothing. Actually, something is going to come into that vacuum, but what is it going to be? Yeah?
Is he the one who talks about the abandonment of moral values and how that leads to the decline of society?
Abandonment of moral values?
I think that's Shaw, maybe.
Yeah, oh yeah, we'll get to Shaw in a moment. Yeah, not yet. At this point, he's not, I mean, he sees civilizations crumbling in, but that's true in many respects, not just morally speaking. So he's not tying that as specifically to this sort of loss of absolutes in the way that some other people are. Yeah?
What's the difference between Eliot's views and Yeats' views? Because Eliot seems like he's saying that civilization is dying, so to speak.
Right. Okay, yeah, they start from the same sort of point, right? Civilization's collapsing. The war has sort of shown us that things are falling apart faster than we might have imagined. And so what is Eliot doing? He's going around picking up fragments, basically, and saying maybe there's some way of rebuilding. Whereas Yeats is saying something else is coming. But what is it going to be? Remember, what rough beast is slouching toward Bethlehem to be born? So there's this sense of fear in Yeats that I think is not there in Eliot. In Eliot, it's more like now we find ourselves in this desert with this crumbled pottery. What are we going to do? I guess there are ways of trying to piece something together here. Whereas Yeats is more like, yeah, we're at the mercy of these cycles of history. And we're near the end of a cycle and the birth of a new one. But what's going to happen? That's a tough time to be alive, basically. And so there's more a sense that, yeah, there's no point in gathering up the fragments because they're about to be swept away by some new tide. But it's one whose shape is still unclear to us. Other things about Yeats. In his case, I'll just say, I feel guilty about this, but to some extent I put quotations on because they're famous quotations and there's just beautiful language.
So it's like going to be like the center will not hold or something?
The center will not hold, right. Ceremonies of innocence are drowned. What rough beast. Some of the beautiful imagery in Sailing to Byzantium, you know, about the immortal, about the eternal. And I suppose you could say there's that concern for the eternal, the immortal. Unlike Nietzsche or some of the others who say, okay, there are no eternal truths. He's saying, no, there really are. There are some things that are immortal, that are eternal, that are golden. And we had better reach out for those things because all the rest is passing away. But maybe there are some things we can grab onto that will last. Now, since we're running out of time, let me leave him there and go to Kipling.
Oh, he does the Law of the Jungle poem, and also he does the copybook headings.
Yeah, law of the jungle.
Oh, yeah.
The copybook headings. And what are the copybook headings?
It's like whatever back in the day when kids would practice their handwriting, they had some saying on the top of the page they were practicing.
Right, you had to practice the sayings, and why?
Because it was just like instill like some moral value to them, like in this weird way that they wrote it.
Exactly.
And he's saying like maybe we should go back to that and like look at our old morals and still use them instead of going like, oh, this ruined everything, let's cast it out. He's like, no, stick with it. The war sucks, but like it still works. The morals themselves.
Exactly, exactly. So Eliot's saying, well, maybe we can find some ground to reconstruct something eternal. Yeats is saying, maybe we can find something eternal and grab onto it. And Kipling's saying, we already know the eternal. There's just a constant pattern in human history. As he puts it, the fool's bandaged hand keeps wobbling back to the fire. We keep being tempted by certain things, but every time we do, the gods of the copybook headings with terror and slaughter return. And so what happens is we keep endangering ourselves. We keep leading civilization into trouble because we can't learn. We keep touching the hot stove, and then we pull back. We say, and then the next generation comes along and says, that looks interesting. Okay? And so it's more that we keep making the same mistakes because we keep ignoring these eternal truths. Other things that are important in Kipling. Yeah?
He's really rational. That's his big thing.
Okay, good. He is rational. He thinks that at least there are, these eternal truths. Now, is it that people are entirely rational? Well, no, not exactly, but there is a sort of law of the jungle. There are things that's reasonable for the wolf or the tiger or whatever to do, right? And so, in some sense, it is rational, but he finds that, in the animal world, says, look, in some sense, the wolf, the tiger, and so on, they are acting completely rationally. And so there is a kind of rational law behind all of this. Unlike other figures who write off the animal world as irrational and treat rationality as our thing, he's saying, no, not at all. In fact, we're sort of less rational than the animal world.
Oh, he's patriotic.
Yes, patriotism. Okay, and what does civilization rest on? Yes, a willingness to use violence. Okay, it's the soldier on the front line who actually defends the rest of us and makes civilization possible. It's, in a sense, the people who are most willing to use violence, who actually protect the rest of us and keep us from having to use violence. And so there's that thin red line of heroes, okay, that Tommy and his fellow soldiers represent. And he sees all sorts of elements within civilization as trying to undermine that thin red line, but it's the line that protects them. And so it's vitally important that we be willing to use violence. Not because violence is a good thing, but because willingness to use violence means that you won't have to use it. If you're strong, if you're ready to defend yourself, people won't attack you. And so, in fact, the way to make peace, he says, is not to be weak, it's not to disarm, it's to be strong and to be willing to use violence if necessary. If you're willing to use it, you won't have to. Anything else from Kipling?
It's just like a big theme of unity of purpose, I believe we need to be unified.
Good. He is concerned with things like trust, what I refer to as social capital, cooperation. I used a nice term which I've now forgotten for this. But unity of purpose.
That's what Tommy's kind of all about, right? That breakdown.
That's right, exactly. And so Tommy is in a way about that. Sort of like, look, cooperation's there and it's important, it keeps us safe, but when it breaks down, then we're in trouble. Okay, when that level of trust breaks down, then we're vulnerable. Okay, we are almost out of time, and we're a bunch of people I'll do in one word, and I'll fill it in later. George Bernard Shaw. Yeah, he's a cynic. Okay, cynicism about traditional values. What about Forster?
I don't really know what
It's all about aesthetics and personal relationships.
Dirty hippie.
Okay? He's a dirty hippie, someone says. Well, yes, it's all about art and friendship for him. What about Pirandello?
Oh, life is absurd.
Masks.
Right, the absurd, masks, the illusions. Right, irrationality. Good. Fitzgerald.
I don't know.
Revitalization.
Well, yeah, decadence, revitalization. Yeah, it's this sense of he's lost touch with the past, right? this lost connection with the past. The new generation, which now it cannot learn from the past, unfortunately, but has this exciting task of rebuilding things anew and defining things anew. So in one sense, he says, I feel lost, I feel confused, but on the other hand, it is now to us to recreate civilization. And so he has the excitement of that new generation and its task. Finally, Woodrow Wilson. Oh, I didn't mention Freud, but you know Freud, dreams, wish fulfillments, blah, blah, blah. Wilson.
Isolationism.
14 points.
Well, whoa, yes.
We don't even know the 14
The 14 points. No, I won't ask you about the details of those, but progressivism, yes.
Middle class.
Yeah, states can do no wrong.
Yeah, good. The middle class and its importance also, yes. The state can do no wrong, okay? And so he wants to have basically no limit to government power. Port.